Hello and welcome to Mel Make Stuff. My name is Melissa and this is my February 2021 podcast. This has been just sort of a weird month. I don't know exactly what happened this month, but I felt like I haven't been getting anything done, and I think this has a lot to do with work has been absolutely crazy. In the past, when I've been working from home, there would be a little bit of time throughout the day to take a 10-minute break and do something that I, wanted to do for myself. And lately there just hasn't been any of that. It's been balls to the wall, 8 hours a day in front of the computer. And so I haven't had any time to knit. It's not even Zoom meetings. I'm actually doing stuff on the computer, which sucks. So I felt like I haven't been getting very much done because ordinarily I might knit during a Zoom meeting or something like that. But as it turns out, I've been knitting a lot outside of work for my mental health. So, I actually have a lot of stuff to show you today. The first thing that I have to show you that is finished but needs some adjustments is the Acre Sweater by Judith brand. So this is a crochet sweater. It was in an earlier edition of Pom Pom. I talked about it last month. I have finished this sweater, but the sleeves are a little bit too long for my taste. Okay, here it is. I'm gonna stand up so you can hopefully see sort of what this looks like on. The things that I like about this are where it's hitting. It's just at, I would say, just above my hips, which I think is a good length for something that's this boxy. I like to keep those a little bit shorter. I like the ease that it has in the shoulder. I think this, for a drop shoulder, it's hitting me about right at the top of my bicep, and I think that is a nice place for the drop shoulder to hit. I don't really want it much lower than that because then I'm going to have a hard time with arm mobility, and if it's higher than that, it's going to look like a messed up set-in sleeve. So I think that was the right size choice in terms of the ease in the size that I chose. And I do also like how the sleeves are not skin tight, but they are still relatively slim fitting. I think it could be a little bit more gathered at the bottom, and that is what I want to fix. So you'll see that I still have all of my strings hanging here. I figured that this was going to grow a little bit with blocking, so I didn't want to weave in my ends quite yet. And I have blocked this now, and the sleeves are too long for my taste. So I would sort of like these to hit about there, which is a problem because then I'm not going to have any cuff left. So I think what I'm going to do is rip both of these cuffs out and then do some decreases around the wrist area to gather the sleeve a little bit, and then do a much shorter version of this cuff. Maybe just 1 or 2 rounds of crochet, or maybe even an I-cord type thing to finish it off, just so that the sleeves will be a little bit more gathered and also shorter, like I prefer. I think I'm going to be doing a finished object type review of this project a little bit later, so I'll talk some more about this at that point. But the thing that has sort of been bothering me about this sweater in general is how much yarn it uses. I chose the 3rd size, which I think is a 45-inch bust around there, and my actual bust is a 35. And for my size, it recommended that I needed 4 skeins of this main pink color, and then I needed 2 skeins of my other 2 contrast colors. So 2 skeins of each. I needed 8 total skeins for this project. And that, in some ways, it is what it is. It just takes up a lot of yarn to make a crochet garment. Sometimes it's going to take more yarn to do crochet than it does knitting, just because of the way the stitches are formed. But that also makes it really cost prohibitive for somebody to go out and buy yarn specifically for this project, which I think is a little bit problematic. So of the 3 yarns that I used for this project, I had 2 skeins of this in my stash. This is Mount Rutsen sock yarn that I had gotten at Rhinebeck a couple years ago. I had 3 skeins of this, which I hand dyed myself. So I knew if I needed the 4th skein that I could just dye another one. So that was not as much of a problem. And then I ended up buying 2 skeins of this, which is Stress Knit's favorite in Succulents. I think it's a Succulents colorway. So I ended up actually buying 2 skeins for this project, and my original intent was for it to use up my stash, so it is what it is. And I don't know how exactly I feel about the fact that this is going to be such a cost prohibitive garment for the larger sizes. That is sort of always going to be the case. Like if you have to buy more yarn for your size, then the projects are always going to be more expensive. I just think it's a shame that this is going to be so much more expensive for the larger sizes. I mean, let's see what they even use. So the largest size of this, which is a 64-inch finished chest measurement, would need 6 skeins of this color and then 4 skeins of each of the other 2. So that's 14 skeins of hand-dyed yarn times $30-ish a skein in the US in 2021. Like, I don't know about that, you know? I don't think there's anybody to blame here. Like, hand-dyed yarn costs what it costs for a reason. It's extremely labor-intensive work, and I in fact think that people are charging probably not enough for it in a lot of cases. I don't know. I'm struggling. I'm struggling with how I feel about this exactly. What I can say, as far as a substitution scenario, like if you're looking to, maybe if you just want to buy hand-dyed yarn for one of the colors, or you know, something like that, what I would do is use just a regular commercially dyed sock yarn for these 2 colors. And that would save a significant amount of money, especially on this top color over hand-dyed. And then I would use your hand-dyed yarn in this color here, and then use your commercial sock yarns in these 2 colors. And another thing that I saw a couple projects doing on Ravelry that I thought was really cool was to use either self-striping or scraps, or like a Noro type yarn. Anything that's got like real intense variegation for that bottom section, the one that's red on my sweater. And it creates these like very interesting stripes because the entire thing is worked sideways. So when you have a color changing yarn, or if you were using scraps, it would change color in these bands going up and down. And so this could actually be a really good scrap busting project in that way if you were going to use scraps for this section. And then some commercial yarn for the other 2 sections. I think that would be the way that I would cut down on cost for this one. So yeah, more to come. I need to think through my feelings about this garment because I want to be able to talk in like a thoughtful way about exactly what I think about this whole situation. About the pattern itself, I do think that it is a fairly well written pattern. I'm not a good crocheter. Like, it's not my main thing. I haven't been doing it for my whole life. I'm like that person who always has to look up every single crochet technique, like a YouTube video of it, just to make sure that I know where I'm putting the hook. Like, I can never figure out where to put the friggin' hook. So considering that, and the fact that I was able to decipher the instructions, I think this is probably pretty well written if you're like an adventurous type of person and you're okay with ripping out if you realize you've done something wrong, which I definitely did a couple times. You know, the thing about these patterns that come in these books or you know, magazines is that there's just not a whole lot of room to really fully explain techniques sometimes. So I think that the techniques that were really needing to be explained for this garment were like the how you do this intarsia, how you do this crochet intarsia. I feel like that was explained well enough anyway that I was able to get it. And there are enough projects on Ravelry now that I think it's, you know, some of them have helpful notes and it's easier to figure out what you're doing. So yeah, I think I'm happy with it. It's a really unusual pattern and I appreciate that. Like, I've never made anything like this before. I think once I fix the sleeves, I'm going to be really happy with the finished garment. So yeah, on to the next thing. So around the middle of this month, I got cast-onitis like real bad and I just let myself go for it. Like, I did not hold back in any way. So the next thing that I finished has actually been started and finished this month. This is the Framework Bralette by Jessie Maed Designs. This is my first time knitting a bra. Like, that's not something that I ever thought I would say. And to be honest, when all of these bra patterns started coming out, I was like, why in God's name would I knit a bra? And I honestly don't fully know what compelled me to go ahead and do it after years of looking at these patterns. I think it's that, so last summer I had knitted a couple of tank tops for the summer that were like in a cotton cashmere blend, and I wore them a lot, like a lot. And I really, like many others, do not like wearing a bra in the summer, so it was sort of just nice to have like something that was still relatively appropriate, like if I needed to go out and get the mail or something. So I think I was sort of envisioning like maybe this can serve as like something that I can wear during the summer while it's super hot and I'm just lounging around. We'll see if that actually happens. So I use stash yarn for this. So the vast majority of this is knitted in Malabrigo Rios in the teal feather colorway. And I did run out of yarn, so I didn't swatch, and this was just like, I'm just casting something on because I want to, and like, F the man. Like, I just really wanted to cast something on, and I didn't want to screw around, and luckily it worked out, but it really easily could have gone wrong. This pattern is knit from the bottom up, so you start by casting on some rib that you do in a specific pattern. So you end up having this center panel, and these lines that sort of go up the middle of each cup end up lining up with your rib, so that's sort of nice. So you knit your rib, and then you knit the body to a prescribed measurement based on your own body measurements. There's a lot of really good instruction in the pattern for this. And then you knit these 4 cups separately. So this is technically reversible. The front and the back are made exactly the same way. And then once you get here, you knit your straps up on front and back, and then you Kitchener at the top of the shoulder. Or you can do a 3-needle bind off too. So I think I realized about at this point that I was going to run out of yarn. So I considered doing a couple different things. I had a bunch of other things in my stash that were like relatively close matches, but I definitely only had the 1 skein of this particular yarn. So I figured I could like fudge with something that I had to make it work. Or I also considered choosing just a totally different yarn and like doing a fade type of thing and then fading to the new yarn in the straps, which also would have worked fine. But I think might have looked a little bit weird with having like really the main chunk of the body knitted in that first color. At any rate, I did make it to the top of both cups on the front and back, and I even got through the straps on the front. But then I just straight up ran out of yarn, so I had to figure something else out for the straps on the back. And what I did was I actually had another skein of my hand-dyed yarn that was a fingering weight in my stash, and it was a close enough color match that I decided to hold 2 strands of that fingering weight together to do the straps on the back, and you really cannot tell. Yeah, you really can't tell that there's a different color there at all. It starts about here. I mean, you can see my little ends there haven't been clipped off yet. Let's see if you can tell at all on the top. Just barely. But like if I hadn't pointed that out, you might not have noticed, you know. So I have worn this already, and I do like the way it fits. I think I don't love wearing clothes on top of it because the clothes sort of get stuck on the knitted fabric. So I think this is something that is really meant to be sort of worn on its own, or maybe with like an open shirt over it or something like that. The other thing, and I'm definitely going to make some more of these because I think this will be a really good scrap busting project, like with DK weight, and you can hold 2 fingering weights together. And I have like tons of fingering weight scraps, right? Like, you know, this that I just used for my Acre Sweater and whatever else, that like there's only so many pairs of scrappy socks that one needs. But holding 2 strands of yarn together and making more of these, I could really see as something that would be useful and also fun. I made this exactly to pattern for my size, which I think was the 28-inch band, I think. But I think what I'm going to do the next time, I feel like the height of this is a little bit matronly on me. I think I was supposed to knit 5 inches from the bottom of the rib. Does that seem right? Yeah, I think I was supposed to knit 5 inches before starting the cups. I think next time I'm going to knit maybe like 3.5 and see what that looks like. So yeah, little FO. I'm happy with this. Like I want to get projects finished and then I just cast stuff on randomly and finish the entire thing and don't finish what I'm actually working on. And I do have one partial FO that is, you're just going to see this for the next couple months. It's really just going to be like a parade of pretty pastel blanket squares. But this is the Rad Bend Throw by Ambah O'Brien, and I finished 3 more squares. I'm using Stress Knits yarn from her advent calendar for this past year. And so yeah, it's just going to be a really pretty like pastel blanket square blanket. And I'm trying to do 3 squares a month. So let me choose my mini skeins for the next month. I've got more stuff in this bin than just these mini skeins. So it's like, what am I actually picking here? Okay. So here are the 3 for next month. So you'll see these knit up in March. For my works in progress, I am doing this to myself, but this Wednesday sweater by PetiteKnit is taking forever, and it's because I'm making it a dress. So here's where I am so far. It's getting rather long. This marker here shows you how much I've knitted this month, which is a lot less than I was hoping to have done. I would say it's about 12 inches. But what I have discovered is that now, so before I was knitting around 6 rows on this, or 6 rounds on this per day. There is something about this yarn and needle combo that is just really bothering my hands. Like, I'm getting wrist pain if I knit that much. So now I'm down to 3 rounds a day on this thing, and that is why it feels like it's crawling. Like, it's gonna get done eventually, but at this rate, I'm not even expecting to have it for this winter. Like, the time that I need it is actually right now, not next month, not the month after that. Like, it's frigid right now, and now is the time I need it, and I'm not gonna have it. I think at this point, my goal is to just have this done before the weather gets warm so that I'm not sitting here with like this weighted blanket on my lap working on it, and then I'll have it for next winter. So that's a little bit of a bummer because I started this in December as what I thought was going to be like a quick bulky weight project to get me through the winter here in my new frigid house, and instead now it's not going to be done for a long time. At least I do get to have it on my lap when I'm working on it, so it is indirectly sort of keeping me warm right now, but just as a blanket. I am using these 2 yarns, which are Fleece Worsted in the Lauren's Coral colorway, and this is some Yak Merino singles yarn from my dye stash. And I am basically just holding this stuff together with everything lately. I had one bag of it that I never ended up really dyeing to sell. Lace weight is just not a super popular hand-dyed yarn really to sell. So I had ended up buying it and then decided not to actually like turn it into a regular sort of line in my brand. I'm okay with it because now I find that I really like holding it together with things. So you'll probably see this again because I have a ton of it. I think I bought it in a bag of 10, and 10 skeins of lace weight goes a long way in projects when you're holding it together with other things. I do really like this color on me, so I'm happy about that. But I'm not happy about how long this is taking. I know, I don't have to make it a dress. I even considered a couple times this month, like I tried it on, trying to convince myself to just stop and like do the bottom hem and just be done with it. And every time it's like, no, it's not quite long enough. No, it's not quite long enough. And then I just keep going, you know, like I know I can stop this at any time, but I want it to be a dress. So I'm forging ahead. I actually started 3 other projects this month in addition to the framework bralette. So like, I don't know what happened. So for this one, I basically just got through the fun part and then like my all momentum stopped, and now this is like just laying in a bag, not doing anything. This is the Sterntaucher by Kate Davies, and it is probably hard to tell what the heck's going on here, but this is a cardigan that only has color work at the bottom, and it's got these sort of giant, almost batwing type sleeves. It's got an extreme drop shoulder basically. So let me stand up so you can get a little bit better perspective here. So it's knitted bottom up. You start at the bottom, you do this rib, you add some steek stitches, which are what you're looking at right here, and then you do your color work. After you get past the steek, past the color work section, you stop your steek. So it's really hard to tell what the heck's going on here. You stop the steek and you add pockets at basically the same time. So here are my 2 pocket holes on either side of the steek. And then right after that is when you start your increases for your batwing sleeves for your upper body. So I'm basically increasing out at each side pretty dramatically here. It's like every other row because I'm now knitting flat since the steek has stopped. So these sleeves are going to, the underarm increases out pretty dramatically, and then you knit the upper body back and forth for the front and back. I think there's some short-ish sleeves. The drop shoulder is so dramatic on this that the sleeves that you do knit, you pick up and knit sleeves afterward, and they are really pretty short at that point because of the shape of the upper body. So that's sort of the story with this. So you will probably recognize this yarn from last month's podcast. This is the farm yarn that I got at my visit to my local yarn shop. Last month I was planning on making the Ginsberg pattern by Nora Gone out of this. I remember saying on the podcast that I was concerned about the stitch definition with this yarn because there just really isn't any. And Ginsberg has some sort of subtle cables. As I was looking at the swatch after I had podcasted and when I was thinking about casting it on, I was like, you know, I don't know. I just didn't really think that this was going to be the best match. Luckily, I had a swatch already and I was happy with the gauge I was getting, which I think was a 14 or 15 stitch gauge over 4 inches. I think. I can't quite remember. I just went on Ravelry and searched by gauge. So you can search, like if you go to the advanced search and you scroll all the way down to the bottom, you can actually choose gauge over 4 inches or gauge over 10 centimeters and put in the number of stitches that you want it to search between. So let's just assume this is 14 stitches over 4 inches. If I want it to match exactly, if I want the pattern gauge to match exactly 14 stitches over 4 inches, I put 14 to 14 in those 2 search boxes, and then it will find all patterns that have exactly a 14 stitch gauge. Whatever that number was that I put in that I was getting on this swatch, it popped up this Sterntaucher pattern by Kate Davies. And I was like, you know, that's cool. Like, I wanted a cardigan for around the house that was longer than what I already have. So I decided to just go for it. Now, this pattern calls for Kate Davies' own yarn. I have not seen this yarn in person. I'm sure it's great. But it's a DK weight yarn, but you hold 2 strands of it together the entire time in this sweater. And I gotta say, like, whenever I see that, I'm, like, impressed with the ballsiness of the person designing a pattern to just sell as much yarn as possible. Like, I get it. And absolutely, like, knock yourself out, right? How else are you going to sell yarn? But that's a lot of yarn. Like, you have to buy so much frigging yarn to hold 2 strands of DK weight together throughout this project. So, like, you know, throughout all of the color work colors as well. And there are 5 different contrast colors here in addition to this background color here. So you really need 7 colors of yarn. So I was like, I'm not buying yarn for this. And so I decided that I was just going to find stuff in my stash to hold double or however much I needed to hold together to get the right gauge. So this main color I'm holding single, just as is, because it's a bulky weight yarn. All of these others are held double at least, and in some cases up to 5 strands together. I am making a process video for this, so you'll see like exactly how I figured that out later on. But just to show you up close, this first color here is actually my hand spun. I held 3 strands of that together. This is a lace weight, so this was where I held 5 strands together. This is a fingering weight. I held 3 strands of that together. This is a DK. I think I held 3 strands of that together too because it was a skinny DK. And then this lightest color in the middle here is, there's actually a bulky hand spun in there, but the color wasn't going to give enough contrast. So I ended up holding like a hand-dyed superwash sock yarn that was like a weird mint green together with my bulky hand spun to pump up the color a little bit. There's still not quite enough contrast in this section for my taste, honestly. If I was going to do this again, that is something I would change. I would definitely pick something a little darker here because you really can't see that at all. Because it's the center color, like the important parts for your eyes to be able to see are these points of the stars. And you can definitely see all of those because they're in a dark enough color, you know. I would change it if I was going to do it again, but I'm not going to rip this out and fix it. You know, that's not a thing. And then my background color, this really light sort of natural sheep color in here, is another DK weight yarn that was pretty skinny, so I ended up holding 3 strands of that together. So I really actually enjoyed the process of trying to drag stuff out of my stash and like see what would work and hold stuff together and, you know, test things out. I did have, I was originally planning on using something different for this red. Like I originally had a pink. I was originally going to use this in there, but there is just no way. Like I'm really glad I made that call almost right away. It was going to be a similar issue as with this stripe, like there was just not going to be enough contrast. So there was definitely a lot of trial and error as I went along. Like I had actually started knitting with that pink yarn, and then I got about, I think I finished an entire round, and I stepped back and looked at it, and I was like, you know, I'm not going to be happy with that, so I might as well just rip it out now. I also ended up completely running out of yarn in this red color. Like I had maybe a round and a half to go, if I recall correctly, and just straight up ran out of yarn. And this red is Harrisville Shetland, so they still make it. Like I could have just ordered another skein, but that defeats the purpose of this being a stash project. So I went in my stash and paired some stuff together that is like completely different than the original yarn. And I'll hold this up really closely so you can see if you can tell. But like you see this bright pink, it's because I'm holding two yarns together in this last round here. And you can tell up close that it's not a perfect match. But again, same as with the framework bralette, like there is no way that you would even notice that anything is different. I'm only about 3 feet away from the camera, and you can't see it at 3 feet in high definition. So I'm not super concerned about that. What I really want to do right now is steek this, because now I'm knitting flat. The stitches are just sort of awkward on the needles because part of it is joined and part of it is not. And so I would really love to cut this open, but I think I need to wash this first. I definitely want to block it before I steek this time. I don't always do that. I want to see this stuff laid down as flat as possible before I cut it. And I also am debating, because I had to like Frankenstein some yarns in here that were superwash yarns that I really like have no business using for this type of color work. I think I want to sew the steek on my sewing machine, and I have never done that before, so that's going to be new for me. So it'll be in the process video for this one, so that'll be interesting. I did find this color work fun, but I also found it to be very hard on the hands, like once again, like everything I'm doing right now, to be holding that such bulky yarn, because I do knit two-handed color work, so my left hand was just really oddly bothered by holding the yarn in my left hand for this. So I actually ended up like using my right hand for a lot of this, maybe the top half of this color work section, and just like dropping the strand that I wasn't using. I would always make sure to keep my contrast color to the left because I wanted that one to be dominant, but I would pick up the yarn with my right hand, drop my one color, and pick up my other color with my right hand still. Like it just took forever, but I didn't want to risk an injury. So the designer also recommends not catching your floats at all, and there are some sections of this color work that actually have really long stretches of one color. So ordinarily I would maybe catch the float on the back of the work somewhere in between on something like this, you know. But the designer recommends not doing it, and she doesn't, I don't think she explains why, but I'm assuming it's because with the bulky weight you might be able to see it more apparently on the front of the garment. So there are all of these extremely long floats that are created. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend this as a beginner colorwork garment for that reason. I think it's actually easier to knit colorwork if you are catching your floats because it helps you maintain your tension really well. But you can see I was really careful to continually stretch the knitting out on my right hand needle, like after I had knitted whatever section and was, you know, having to create one of these super long floats. But really, I did not find that enjoyable. Like I don't like that. It seemed very messy when I was doing it, but actually looking at it now, it's pretty neat on the backside. Other than, you know, I had to join in yarn multiple times and stuff like that. I'm staying motivated for this one because this is what I'm making as part of the Color Play cowl, which is being held by Selma of Little Big Knits, which is another wonderful podcast if you don't watch her already. So this is my entry. There might be another one, let's be honest. I love friggin' color work, so. So the other sweater that I cast on this month, I can't believe I'm doing this to myself, but this is the Sawyer Pullover by Sari Nordland. I am really enjoying working on this, but I made an incredibly fiddly yarn choice. I like how it's turning out, but I have just like basically created a giant pain in the ass for myself. So this pattern is written for a regular DK weight yarn. So I, being the genius that I am, decided that I was going to hold a fingering weight and a mohair together because I know that I will generally be able to get a DK weight gauge with that combination. I don't have a whole lot of DK weight yarn in my stash. Like, I don't buy DK weight sweater quantities, although I need to change that. Like, if I am buying a DK weight sweater quantity, it's usually for a very specific project. So I decided, you know, instead of buying a DK weight sweater quantity, which I obviously don't need because I got a ton of yarn, I am going to do a combo. The original yarn is the Hedgehog Fibers tweed yarn, which they make with scrap. It's like a natural colored yarn, but they use scraps that have been cut off of their yarn ties, like after they've been done dyeing skeins of yarn. So the yarn is a tweed yarn, but it has all of these like colored specks throughout it, which is really cool. But because it's really cool, it's been sold out like since they introduced it, and there's no getting a hold of it even if I wanted to buy yarn right now. So what I decided to do was to take some tweed yarn from my dyeing stash and hold it together with some mohair that I had in my stash as well. So this is the Knitting for Olive mohair in the Plum Clay colorway, which is like a, can't tell if this is brownish purple or purplish brown. I think, I don't know, it's right in the middle. And then this is the tweed yarn I'm using. So it's just a regular undyed fingering weight sock yarn. And the tweed bits in here are just like the standard tweed bits you would find, brown and black colors. And so this is resulting in a really interesting fabric. Like the cables are not, you know, at a distance, not as defined as they would be if I was not holding a mohair together with a yarn. I mean, mohair is always going to sort of soften the look of the sweater a little bit, but I do really like the effect, and I like the effect of the dark mohair with the light main yarn, which is something that I have done in the past, and I really like. I think that does provide a little bit more stitch definition. Like the mohair might take some definition away, but if you pair a dark mohair with a light color that you're holding it with, that will sort of give some of the definition back because it creates these shadows in the cables. I'm actually quite happy with how this is coming out so far, but holding the mohair together with the fingering weight and doing, like, a lot of these cables are rather, I don't want to say intricate, like it's not like there are so many stitches crossing over each other or anything like that, but there's a lot of like 1x1 crosses, bobbling and things like that. And if I'm not catching both strands of the yarn, it's like a real pain to drop down and fix it because mohair, just ripping out mohair is a pain in the butt. The other issue that I'm having with this sweater, which has absolutely nothing to do with the pattern and entirely everything to do with me, is that my brain is fried right now. And so I can't always concentrate across the entire length of like one of these cabled patterns. And so if I do make a mistake, I am having to drop down and fix it. I'll notice it on the next round and then I just drop down and fix it instead of tinking back. I did miss a bobble earlier today, and there is no dropping down to add a bobble. Like there's just not enough yarn in the vicinity if you were going to try to drop down and do that. So I did have to tink back. It was only about half a round, but that's pretty epic when I'm holding mohair together with something. This is like a mistakes not recommended sweater, so I really have to pay attention to this. And I have been addicted to knitting this thing since I started it. Well, really since I got past the rib. Like the rib was, you know, boring rib like always. But then as soon as I got into the cables, like I think my mind has really been looking for something to engage with when I'm knitting. Like I've been, for the most part, knitting relatively simple projects. Some of the colorwork stuff hasn't been that simple, but I don't know, it's doesn't engage my brain in the same way as doing cables does. So yeah, that's that. I have no idea how long this is going to take me. I really hope that it blocks out a little bit because I don't want to have a mohair sweater that is too tight. Like nobody wants that. And I think it will, but it's bunched up on these little needles, and so it's sort of wigging me out a little bit. I did swatch I would never do like a major yarn substitution like this without swatching. So I did swatch. I am getting gauge. So I think I'm just gonna trust my swatch. Hopefully I won't have to eat my words on that. And the last thing that I cast on this month that is certainly not going to be finished for possibly years is the Saint Laurent Shawl by Espace Tricot. This is a free pattern. It's available on Ravelry, and I have been wanting to knit this shawl for a long time, but I have been putting it off because I knew it was going to be mind-numbing. This was a case of I had 2 skeins of lace weight yarn that I knew I wanted to go together, but I didn't want to marl them. So it's actually not really that easy to find a lace weight pattern that sort of has 2 colors that are just adjacent to each other. Like I didn't want striping. I didn't want a whole lot of switching of the colors. Like I wanted something that was sort of binary, like one color next to the other color in a very simple pattern, but also something that I was going to want to wear. These are the yarns that I have, and they are very similar in color. I got these last February when I was on vacation with my sister and our 2 friends. We usually get together for a knitting sort of retreat on our own each year. And so we were in Arizona. My family lives in Arizona. So we were visiting my sister in Phoenix last year and went to one of her local yarn stores. And so this is some locally dyed, naturally dyed yarn. This one, which I've started the project with, is dyed with black bean. It's a silk and BFL blend, 2-ply, so it's perfect for lace. And this one is dyed with black bean and cochineal. So it's a little bit blue compared to this one here, which is a little bit green. So here is what the pattern looks like. I hope it's going to be able to focus on this. It's basically just a mesh repeat. And so the structure of the overall pattern is almost like a big elongated kite shape. And so half of the kite is one color, and then they have, you know, you can obviously do it in a single color or you can just choose your other color. My understanding is that when you go to use your second color, you essentially like attach it to the first half of the kite as you go. I'm not going to find out about that for like a frigging year because this is taking forever. It's a really delicate pattern, and it's not made in the way that I was anticipating. I'm enjoying it well enough, but I think that part of my issue with this so far has been the needles. You'll see that I'm knitting it on straight needles, and that is because I am using Irish cottage style knitting for this project. So for me, this means that I hold my my empty needle under my arm, and then, you know, I tension my yarn with my right hand in such a way that this is the style I'm using for this piece. I recently put out a video on how I learned to do this style, which was sort of my project last summer, was to learn this knitting style and be able to incorporate it into my regular use. So here I am using it for another project. I think part of the issue is that these needles are too blunt. So these are Knitter's Pride Carbons needles, and you can see like the tip of this needle is almost a bullet shape. It's really not pointy enough for doing lace. So I think that that is why this project has not been as enjoyable as it could be up until this point. And so I have decided that since it seems like I'm going to be actually using this knitting style, I enjoy having an arsenal of knitting styles that I can use, however, that I'm going to start investing in some nice straight needles. I mean, I learned to knit on straight needles. I have a ton of them from way back, but a lot of them are like scratched up or the tips are not super nice, and I don't want to struggle with my equipment. So I've decided, you know, if I'm going to go ahead and be using this style regularly, that I should invest in proper equipment that is going to make my life as easy and enjoyable as possible. So I have ordered some signature straight needles in a couple of small sizes. These are a 14-inch length, which might not work for everybody. And the ones that I ordered are a 14-inch length as well. If you're taller, you might want a 16-inch length, which to my knowledge, Signature doesn't offer. Knit Pro have the 16-inch length. It's a 40 centimeter length, but if you're in the US, you have to order them from outside the US. I haven't done too much looking into this because I just experimented with the 16-inch needles a little bit and found that they were too long for me for my body length, but I'm only 5'2". So, you know, I have short arms and I have a relatively short torso just compared to like a person who's a more normal height. So for me, the 14-inch needles are okay. When those have arrived, I am going to switch this project over to those and hopefully be having a little bit better of an experience. We'll see. All right, I think that's it. There's just like knitting strewn about the entire room now, all of my new projects, balls of yarn flying everywhere. I'd say I need to cast on fewer things, but honestly, I think casting things on this month has been really good for me. Like, I think I just needed something to be feeling good about, feeling excited about, that, you know, after a long work day, that I could have something to look forward to that wasn't a chore. I think that's what a lot of this cast-on-itis was coming from. And these projects, the new projects, have sort of been fulfilling that. So now, you know, I'm not a quitter on projects. Like, I will keep working on stuff until it's done, but I definitely don't want to have like 50,000 projects going on at the same time. I think that's too many. I mean, now I think I have about 6 active projects, and that feels like a little bit too many. I mean, you can really only give your attention to one at a time. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what I can get done in the next month and see what else I feel like casting on, because I'm just not in a place where I'm going to stop myself if I feel like I need to do something. Yeah, so we'll see where this goes, I guess. Thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate you watching, and I'll see you next month. Bye.